Go! Hey everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and sorry about that stuttering music. Let's try another take of that, but it's in the background, right? I welcome everyone to the Music Masterclass. This is our series where we look at different aspects of creating music, the music creation process. Composing, arranging, improvising, playing by ear, all these sort of creative acts. And as has been what we've been doing lately, we are looking at counterpoint and looking specifically at the inventions that people have been submitted. And I've been really, really happy. We've gotten so many really great submissions on this, and I've tried to comment on as many of them as I can. And we're just going to take a look. There's no way I can look at everyone's today, but I can definitely look at a few. And so I've picked out a few that sometimes they're just really good examples, and sometimes they're like things that show a thing that multiple people are like have questions about or can learn from. So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit on this. Let me make sure I turn my volume back up to a more reasonable level now. So I'm going to flip over to where I have these, and we're going to take a look at some of these here. I'm actually going to start. Which one am I going to start with? I want to start with. Here we go. Shelley's. All right. So Shelley, this is, I think, an excellent example, and it's one that shows that you can accomplish a lot with a little, and just go through the process and learn from the process without feeling like you're like creating this big gigantic thing that's going to take you years to complete or anything. It's a nice simple one measure theme, right? Oh, let me shrink this window down so I don't lose the chat here. There we go. And today it's going to let me zoom in. That's good. It's a nice simple one measure theme. That's all there is to the theme. Super simple. So before I even play it, the whole piece, I want to point out one of the things that makes it effective. I mean, it's just a scale, or a tetrachord to be technical, right? Just going up and down that scale, but it does so using different rhythms, right? The eighth, the dotted 8/16, and then the descending 16ths, and then at the end, it just has that little turnaround. Instead of just going, it comes and goes up for a moment and then comes back down. It's a very simple theme, and yet it's just memorable enough, just noticeable enough that you're going to have no trouble catching where it gets entered, where it enters in the piece. So let's go ahead and hear this. There you go. So I think she just like totally nailed things. And now I'm realizing that I had made a comment about one of the measures, and she had actually uploaded a different version based on my comments. And changed one measure of it. So as we look at it further, I'll pay attention to that. But let's pay attention to the overall structure of this, because I didn't want to put a lot of rules in place for you to follow, because they're just conventions, right? An invention is to some extent an invention of Bach's. I mean, it's not like sonatas and minuets that have been around for decades or centuries by Bach's time, where there was like a set format that everyone kind of knew you were supposed to follow. He just said, I'm going to write these pieces. And he kind of came up with a scheme it's not like he invented the scheme whole cloth, but he put a name to it, etc. And the general idea is you have your theme in one voice. It is then repeated at the same pitch level, but maybe at the octave in the other voice. And then you just kind of play with it. You play with it by stating something in one voice, repeating it in the other. Not all the things are going to get repeated. At some point, there's modulations to other keys, probably the relative minor. At some point, it reaches another key, either the relative minor or the 5, and maybe there'll be another statement of a theme imitated in the other voice again, like another exposition, to borrow a term that's used in fugues or and sonatas for that matter. And so that's going on here. She has the theme, she has it repeated. And then once she reaches B minor, again, she has her theme, and then she has it repeated. Wait a minute. No, she doesn't actually have it repeated, and that's fine. You don't always have to have it repeated. She repeats it several measures later down here. So there's no set, you must follow it this way about any of this. So in any case, I just think this is just a nice example of taking this, following the process, and coming up with some really nice music from it. I do want to hear the measure that she changed. Originally, this measure here was, or something like that. I don't remember what it did after that, but... And I commented that back and forth 1-5-1-5 felt a little not in character with the rest of the piece, and gave her some suggestions that I haven't checked out yet. But not only that, you then end up with these parallel octaves, and to me, the fact that they're parallel octaves, I didn't care at all. It felt like, I don't know why I'm playing that line, but that's a much later piece that uses that same thing. The Bizet, is that? I don't even remember. I don't know. Anyhow, so that type of figure, that 1-5-1 figure in octaves, feels like, yeah, if you're going to double something in octaves, that's the way to do it. So that didn't bother me, but it was just the harmonic aspect of that 1-5-1-5 felt out of character. So I discussed some options, and I want to see what she came up with. So I'm just going to play that passage, starting from where the theme is stated in B minor. Ah. Oh man, that made all the difference. Well, that plus, of course, the sounds, right? Now we're hearing this nylon guitar sound, which is a pretty cool sound. Okay, I kind of feel like I have to just play the piece again now and hear the whole thing. Modulate, B minor. Oh yeah, now it's gone from just being a nice, simple example of doing the right stuff and coming up with something decent to being really, really a lovely piece. And I don't know if she changed anything other than that one measure and the sound, but what a difference it made, because now, right, you get that imitation between the voices just of that little figure. That figure, ba-da-da-da-dum, is a figure drawn from within the theme. It's just taking that little motif and playing with it. So yeah, I'm the original version again of that measure was just this. Right? That was fine, but you see how much that little imitation added? The fact that it was imitation helps. It was wonderful. That was unexpected bonus. So the imitation, beautiful, wonderful, I love it. But also just getting away from just this simple harmonic accompaniment there and turning it into an actual melodic line is more interesting than, right? So there's nothing wrong with occasionally having 1 5 1 5 1 like that, but it felt out of character. And now this feels like this is taking it from being the one place that maybe wasn't quite in keeping with the rest to being one of the shining points of the whole piece. So absolutely worth that extra effort there, Shelley. You did great. Okay, so that's that piece. I'm going to flip over now to another one here. Yeah, like I said, I've got a few queued up that sort of demonstrate different things, and this is Kevin McDonald's piece. And this one, yeah, well, this is really really well done. I want to remind myself of, oh yes, I didn't actually say anything much about it. This is just really really well done. It feels stylistically totally on point, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just wonderful job, Kevin. I mean, there's so much good stuff going on. You're just going to really enjoy everything that you're going to hear today. So this figure is like already it's only two notes, but rhythmically it's distinctive enough that that jumps out, and then that little figure is really distinctive, and so every time it shows up, and it's so well done between the voices, right? Here's that figure in the top voice, here's it in the bottom voice, and then you see some playing around with little motifs from it, but then here's that ba da 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 da, or but resolving a little different. But you get that little figure here, and then you get, which is like an inversion of that figure here, and then you get that. Oh, here's that whole theme in the relative minor, D sharp, and then it repeats in the same voice, but then you get it in the other voice, right? And now you get, oh, here it is, that whole figure, but starting mid-measure instead of starting at the beginning of the measure. That's a good point, and that tells me which one I want to listen to next. This point of at what beat you start your imitation at, let's hold on to this. It doesn't always have to be the same beat, but the idea that originally that figure was 1 da dum, or 1 da 2, right? The figure basically started with a pickup into beat 2. In 4/4 time, what you expect out of imitations is the imitation will come in on the same beat. So like this imitation here comes in also with the pickup, basically a little pickup into beat 2. And then when it shows up here in the relative minor, it's also a pickup into beat 2. Again, pick up into beat 2. Again, pick up into beat 2. But in the bottom voice. But here, that ba-dum, ba-dum is a pickup into beat 4, right? So that idea that beat 1 and 3 have something in common, and beats 2 and 4 have something in common in 4/4 time, or any similar 12/8 time also. The idea of strong and weak beats in any duple type meter. The odd numbered beats are strong. The even numbered beats are weak. And so if you have a theme that starts on beat 1, as so many do, then you expect the imitation to also be on beat 1 or on beat 3. So it's still a strong beat. And this helps keep the metric flow feeling like consistent. I don't know. It helps it stay like, it helps it feel like it's still in 4/4, even though this is coming at a different point. This is basically a form of stretto here. If you've read ahead, he's starting the theme, and while he's doing that, right, he's bringing in that theme while it's still playing. In doing so, he ended up with a pretty harsh dissonance there, right? He ends up with a pretty harsh dissonance right there on beat 4. So let me come back to that. So yeah, the theme, originally he had it starting on beat 2, or pick up into beat 2. Now it's pick up into beat 4. So it's still pick up into weak beat. So it's consistent as far as that goes. But then, yeah, the fact that he's doing this, he's creating this fairly harsh dissonance on the beat, but you know, it's nothing but a neighbor tone. It's approached by step, resolves by step. It just happens to be a harsh dissonance of a minor ninth, you know, a minor ninth plus an octave, and on the beat. So it's harsh, but so good. And that's the sort of stuff that differentiates, you know, a lot of Baroque music from earlier music. They would have shied away from that type of thing more in the Renaissance. At least most composers would. But Bach was like, no, I've got this imitation pattern. It's going to put a dissonance in a slightly uncomfortable place, but I promise I'm still going to resolve it okay. And he does. And that's Bach. And Kevin is fulfilling Bach's promise. So he creates that little dissonance, but therefore he gets to have that little bit of stretto. So that the top voice is stating the theme before the bottom voice has finished. That's stretto. So anyhow, great stuff. And then there's this measure where the voices come together for a moment. Right? Both voices come together on beat 2, and then they both have that rest in the middle of the beat, right? And so everywhere else, the motion has been kind of continuing and passing between the voices. That's a place where they come together briefly, and it creates a wonderful textural contrast. And it's just that one beat of that, but it's a cool little effect. Now, you want to do that when you want to do that, right? You don't want random places where there's like the motion has stopped in all voices. But if it works for you and what you're doing with the imitation, great, you go for it. So now he's got all sorts of little sequences of just that boo-ba-da-da-dum figure. Right, so the boo-ba-da-dum, and then right? So it's passive voices, totally a Bach thing, right? And then all those little ornaments and stuff also really elevate the piece to make it feel more like how these Baroque pieces are structured. So anyhow, it's just so many really, really nice things going on in this piece. Love it. So I want to come back to that thought that I talked about the strong beat and weak beat business, and there were several pieces that had, I commented about this, and I'm going to jump over to, I think this is the right tab here. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm going to be looking at Catherine's piece. Yes, all right. So we're going to listen to this piece, which is also really, I mean, everything that was submitted has really good stuff about it. This is well done in so many ways, but I do want to talk about the concept of the strong beat, weak beat. Oh, and in 3/4. So I said in 4/4, the odd numbered beats, or in any duple meter or quadruple meter, in anything where there's an even number of beats, the odd beats are strong, the even beats are weak. In 3/4, in triple meter, or 9/8, the downbeat is strong, both of the other two are weak. You rarely would have an entrance of a theme somewhere other than the same metric position. So if the original theme is a pickup into beat 1, like this is, I'm going to expect the imitation to also be into beat 1, as this is. So let's take a listen to this, and then we'll talk about that a little more. So again, she's followed the basic form really well. She's got the original theme imitated in the other voice, and then playing around with a little sequence here, right? And accomplishes her modulation through the use of that sequence, which is exactly how that goes. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I am now noticing some parallel octaves here. The doubled leading tone has led to a doubled a parallel octave. So because the top part is a sequence, you don't want to mess with that. Maybe there was some other way, because really this G sharp is a ringer of a note, right? I mean, it's not the original pattern went up a step and then down, up a step and down. This could have gone up to a C and back down. So it could have done that. But in any case, one of the voices is often fixed because it's imitation, right? And so it becomes like a cantus firmus. So you do have, usually one of your voices, like, well, I can't touch that voice because it's imitating something else. And so you have to take the other voice and say, well, maybe I don't need a G sharp there. Or maybe the common trick is just let that G sharp leave the G sharp when the other voice takes the G sharp. And so this idea of exchanging the two voices, B and G sharp, and then G sharp and B. Same two notes, but they've flipped which one has which. Super common trick. And that idea of super common trick now tells me I know what I'm listening to next. So Paul, you're up next, and remind me super common trick when I get to yours. The thing I was going to mention about this piece had to do with that metric position thing. So what I said is, if you have a piece in 3/4, you're going to expect the imitation to always be in the same metric position. Strong beat. So this is a pickup into strong beat. Beat 1 is the only strong beat. So I expect the imitation to also be into beat 1. But what happens as a result is you end up with this, what I call a full stop. And then nothing happens for like a beat and a half. And now, right, so you get nothing happening for that time. That's what I meant by a full stop. It's not like full stops never happen in themes. It is a little awkward feeling it at the end of the theme. And so maybe you might have wanted to, if I were her, I might have continued this line. So, just added a little, what's called a tail onto the theme to tie it, to cover those last couple beats. That term tail is one that we'll see, I think I use it in the fugue section, because it's quite common that your subject will end somewhere in the middle of a measure, and then you just need to fill a couple beats before the repetition, before the imitation comes in. So that was an opportunity. Now, the first thing that I thought, though, about this is, this doesn't really feel like 3/4 to me. If you just listen to that theme, here's what I hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's what I hear. I hear that E as being the downbeat. I don't know that's, everyone's going to hear things different. And I have to say that I've written pieces, including a fugue, in which I wrote a subject thinking I'd written it in 4, and then looked at it back later and said, oh my gosh, that thing's actually in 3. Because I was perceiving which was the downbeat differently. But if you think about this rhythm kind of logically, that's like a little figure. 1, ba-dum, dum. That's like a little 2-beat figure. And then is like another little 2-beat figure. And then it ends with another 2-beat figure. So I feel like this is 4/4 or 2/4, either way. To me, I never write in 2/4. I just write in 4/4 because it's largely the same thing. And that could be 1, 2, 1. Either way, I feel like the A is a strong beat, and so is the E is the strong beat. I don't feel like that F is the strong beat. You all following me here? I keep looking back here to make sure I'm not missing anything in chat and make sure I'm still live. Because, yeah, let me know what you're thinking about that. So, anyhow, assuming that we go with what I'm saying here, that this E is actually the downbeat, and that this is really in 4/4, a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 1, then in that case, that is where the imitation should come in. Right? So that is what I would expect, is that pickup to kind of overlap the line. The pickup, so that the pickup would come in on the and of 4, so that the first note of the theme would come in on 1. Now, there's a thing that's going on here. In addition to this being a super big leap to make, it's also starting this on a 4th. It goes down to a 5th and goes to a 6th. I mean, it's all fine. There's nothing wrong with this, but if you wanted to not start with a 4th like that, you could just repeat the E, which would be a fine start. And actually, no, if you do that, the E comes in with the G, right? If you do it that way, that would be that much better, I think. So if that C had come in along with this G in the melody, and then the G in the theme came in along with the E in the theme, that would have been perfect. That's often what we want, is when the theme gets imitated in the other voice, we want to hear a triad. We want to hear a major triad so that it says that we have, a 1 chord. Maybe it's not a 1 chord, maybe it's going to be a 5 chord where it happens, but very often a 1 chord. And just hearing a root and a 5th it sort of says that. It would say it more if the root were on the bottom, right? If the root were on the bottom, hearing a root and a 5th would say, okay, I got a triad. But hearing it in this order, it's a little less clear that we have a 1 chord. And still, in these cases, I would rather omit the root than the third. And that's something that we'll see when we talk about fugues and what start notes to use and how that causes the answer to line up and stuff, because then we'll get deeper into that subject. So anyhow, this was a good example of this idea of thinking a little harder about the rhythm of the line and stuff like that, right? So, yeah, if I change it to 4/4, it's going to obviously change the bar line, but it's not going to move this line over. I'd also have to move the imitation over, and then that's going to change how this accompaniment goes, so there would be a lot more to it. However, this passage here, oh, that's the other thing I could have done. Boom, 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 instead of boo-da-dum. So this part is absolutely in 3/4, right? And so would it be okay for there to be this sort of hemiola thing of essentially a 3-beat sequence that then crosses the bar line? Sure, that could be okay. Or you could just change to 3/4 for a few bars. Lots of different ways this could play out. But yeah, if I change it to 4/4, that's not going to fix anything. It's just going to change the notation. I would have to also move this bottom voice over, which now means that the top notes no longer fit it, right? And so no, it's going to require more surgery than that to make that change. But once you've done that little bit of surgery, I think the rest of the piece probably plays out pretty much as is, just fine. So I really like her modulation to the relative minor, and then she takes her time about that using the sequence, which is great, but then she manages to come home very quickly, because look what happened. Her original theme ended on scale degree 3, so therefore her repetition also ends on scale degree 3 in A minor, but that C is now the original tonic, and so she's already set up a return to the tonic. And yeah, Dave, you're almost certainly right. It wouldn't require more than a couple measures of changes. It's just more than I'm going to have time to deal with right now because I want to try to get to some more pieces. But absolutely, when Catherine, I know Catherine, you're not here right now, but when you check this out, I'll encourage you to try those things. So the fact that this line ends on a C means she's basically already in C. She doesn't have that line accompanied, so there's no A underneath that C to say that we're still in A minor, and so she's able to just kind of finish the piece out and basically be in C already, and then just write a nice little ending for the piece, which is a new version, which is just a transposition, a tonal adjustment, a tonally adjusted transposition of the original, right? Theme. So she's kind of restating that theme at a different pitch level to finish the piece out. And it didn't need any fancy modulation to get there because the theme happened to end on scale degree 3. So yeah, anyhow, very cool stuff. But here again, you have that full stop thing, which probably would have been better if this A had come in a little sooner, so that we had bum bum, and that probably would have been beat 1, and then boo bum would have also been on beat 1. So that part also would probably need to slide over to eliminate that kind of full stop. And especially you don't want to have these full stops close to the end of the piece because it then feels like a premature ending, unless that's your goal. So again, Paul, your piece is up next, and now I got two things to talk about. One is the fact that you've got a false ending, and a very effective false ending. But I also want to talk about this idea of that little pattern, and I said there's like a certain pattern to that's like a common device, and I want to talk about these common devices because often what you'll see is that Baroque and classical music in particular and Renaissance music are full of these little patterns, little 1-2 beat snippets, or combinations of 4 or 5 notes that you see get used over and over again because they work so well. And one of those came up in my discussion of Paul's piece here. But then you'll also hear the false ending. So this is kind of the opposite in some ways of the first piece we listened to. When I said the first piece was thanks for the reminder, Paul, and I just said that before I even saw your reminder, so perfect. So what I want to say about Paul's piece is really, really well done. But as I was starting to say, it's kind of the opposite of the first one, in that the first one we listened to, I said was this was nicely simple and self-contained, ticked all the boxes, put it all together, put a bow on it, and in 9 bars it was in 9 bars it said everything it needed to say, hey, I've got these techniques down. And especially with that change she made, oh my god, it was a great piece of music. Paul's though is just totally it's not 9 bars long, let's put it that way. He's gone much further with this, developed it like crazy, done all sorts of really interesting things. And Dave, if you're saying that this one, if you mean Paul's, has a lot of range, then I think you're probably right. And which makes it, well, we'll listen to it. All right, so let's just check this out. This is so good. just just fabulous. So, and I again, even though I knew it was coming this time, measure 11 just like made me laugh out loud because yeah, my comment was it's like I was like, man, he's channeling Bach, and then measure 11 comes along and suddenly it's Beethoven, right? Bach, Bach, then suddenly those low arpeggios is kind of a Beethoven-y thing to get these really deep, big chords. So anyhow, but yeah, just so much going on in here. But it's all the same devices, right? He's just choosing to take it so much further. So his basic theme is a nice, perfectly fine, relatively simple theme. Is the motif, and then it's the theme itself has a little sequence within it, right? And then it has this extra little tail on it that, just finishes the line off and is, so both of these, that's distinctive and is distinctive, right? So there's like two distinctive little elements in it that help you recognize this theme when it comes back. But he's also doing a really good job of making sure the counterpoint doesn't obscure the theme. Like here, right? He's just got quarter notes against those 16th notes. So you can't miss the 16th notes, right? And it's not like it always has to be that. Or here, it's eighth notes. I'm assuming that's going to an E, yeah. And then here, the theme comes back, or something related to the theme. It's not quite an inversion of it. It's something a little different, but rhythmically, yeah, actually what's happening here in measure 3 is interesting. It's related, but it's not specifically the same theme. It's not specifically an inversion, but it keeps the same rhythmic pattern. And then after that, it is an exact transposition after that, or at least a tonal transposition. But right, again, he's got quarter notes against the 16th, so the 16ths get to sing. And the thing that, one thing you can always do is like look for opportunities to let the accompaniment be more active. If one voice is stating the theme, if the theme is very active, you'll often want the other voice to be less active. But when the theme has a little stop in it, like that eighth note, that's a place where you might expect there to be 2/16ths in the other voice. And I'm not sure, Paul, if you ever do that. If you ever have 2/16ths against that, but that would be something, just know that here's something kind of like it. Here's 2/16ths against an eighth at more or less the same point, but this is more of a fragment of the thing. But anyhow, that's something you could think about. So anyhow, he's got that. He's got the sequences going on. Yeah, he's just using all of these elements, but not just like one example of each. Like, oh, I'm going to give you 5 of these and 4 of these, and modulations. There's several different modulations in here. This modulation is especially interesting to me. No, not this one. This is all good. I mean, that's a great modulation too. It goes to A minor and then kind of to what feels like it's going to be D minor. Right, that's basically D minor. Now, then it's a D major chord, a 5 of 5 going into the 5 chord. The G chord, which then goes into the C chord here. So yeah, he's modulating right back into C. It's actually the modulation to A, or what feels like a modulation to A that isn't. Check out this passage. At that point, it feels like, oh my gosh, he's gone to A major. That's an unrelated key, right? It's got 3 sharps, and we started with 0 sharps. So he's gone to 3 sharps, so it appears. Because he lands right on this thing, like, oh, we're in the key of A. How interesting. But what's actually happening, it's really, I think I'm playing that correctly, I think that's an A. But in any case, it's really an A7 chord, it's really an A7 chord. It's really a 5 in the key of D minor. This isn't really a modulation to A. It's the arrival of an A chord, but that A chord is really the 5 chord in D minor. The actual modulation is to D minor, which is a related key. But then he does that same trick of then immediately going to D major, to G, so he can come back to C, circle of fifths coming back. So one of the things that I would observe about that is that arrival on the A chord shows up as surprising because you kind of have a secondary dominant leading to that also, right? You have this E chord. So you have this E major chord or E7 chord in the previous measure that feels like it's going to go to A minor, right? Because that's what we would expect. We're in the key of C. We only expect modulation to A minor. So you've set up an expectation that we're going to A minor. So when we hear the A7 chord, it comes as a surprise. And we think we're in the key of A major, but then nope, in the second half of the measure, you tell us, nope, surprise, psych, we're really going to D minor. So anyhow, this is all stuff that's maybe a little not as Bach-like, more Beethoven-like, because those sorts of surprises are very late classical. Not even early classical, but late classical going into romantic is when you expect to see those sorts of interesting surprises like that. So the thing that I actually wanted to talk about, let me just mention that false ending, right? Because it has this passage here where you think the piece is over, but then nope, little coda, little repetition of that idea. This time he tells us, okay, it's not really over by giving us that C sharp, and then finally ends it. So that sort of dramatic ending is also very Beethoven or Mozart, you know, that the composers of that era would love to play these sorts of drama tricks on us and stuff like that. So anyhow, that's really cool. But yeah, this sequence here, that's the sequence. That's what we're looking for. We want these sequences in this previous measure. Right? That's another nice little sequence. He's got just lovely sequences all over this thing. So the actual thing that I want to talk about these common devices had to do with that measure, what did you say, it was 24, where you have a dissonance that you didn't know if you were okay with. And so starting on the middle of the measure, we have this basically it's 2/3 of an A7 chord or a C sharp diminished chord. We're basically about to tonicize a D minor chord, right? The downbeat of the next measure is a D minor chord, right? So this is a tonicization of that D minor. And so he lands on this, and then what he does next is what he had the question about, or not so much a question, but like reservations about. But check this out. That passage is, we have this dissonance here, B to A, right, a seventh. And it's kind of like leaping into it from both voices, so it's not prepared in the conventional sense. Now it resolves by step to another dissonance, a tritone for sure, but it's on its way to resolving here. So, you know, all is really well with that. If you want to call this a double, an appoggiatura in both voices, I'm fine with that. But, and I said that probably Bach has used this before, because if you think about it, if you're trying to get to this type of consonance, I'm going to take it down an octave if you don't. No, I'm going to leave it in this octave. You can see my hands, right? Sure you can. This having a root and third, or scale degree 1 and scale degree 3, if we think that we're in D minor at this point, a lot of pieces are going to want to, in two-part counterpoint, are going to want to have a lead into that exact combination, right? 1 and 3. 1 in the bottom, 3 on top. And this idea of approaching in contrary motion, well, that's how could you not think of that idea at some point in your life. If you're writing things and trying to get here, if you're Bach and have written as many measures as you have, at some point you've thought, hey, what would happen if I approached, if I write a 1 and a 3, which I'm going to write a million times, what would happen if I approached it in contrary motion? Well, this obviously is really good. It's that tritone resolving inward. It's this, 7 resolving to 1 or 5 resolving to 1, right? So that much for sure. But it doesn't take, it's not a huge stretch to say, well, what happens if I back up a step? And so I'm quite sure that if you look hard enough, and maybe not even that hard, you'll find examples of Bach using that exact pattern. But I also suggested to Paul that if you are at all uncomfortable with it, here's what is common. Instead of having 6, 7, 1, and 5, 4, 3, instead of that combination, have 5, 6, 7, 1, whoops, 5, 5, I'm going to sing it, hit, 5, 6, 7, 7, 1. I'm trying to sing both parts at once and I can't, of course. Or, in other words, we're walking up the whole scale, 5, 6, 7, 1, instead of just 6, 7, 1. That way the two 5s can be together. And then the 6 is either a passing tone against that, or it's comes in with this. So either this or either of those are going to be super common ways of expressing that same idea of contrary motion into that 1-3 consonants, but without needing that dissonance there. And again, nothing wrong with the dissonance, but the fact that, again, you're leaping right into it, I see why you were concerned. Probably not an issue, but this is going to be the super, super, super common alternative. So anyhow, just so much to enjoy in this piece, and I encourage people to be talking about this further in comments on his piece itself, because it's definitely worthy of further discussion. But yeah, there's just lots of good stuff going on, lots of good use of that motif, inverting. Did it? Here's an inversion, right? Right, that's an inversion of at least a portion of it, and then we get little snippets of it. So he's breaking it up into fragments, doing all the right stuff with this piece. Okay. I'm just finally noticing the actual opus number that was commented on. Okay, that's a silly number. Okay, so what I want to jump to next is, I'm not sure. I think it's going to be Kevin's once I find it. Man, I haven't actually listened to Linda's yet. I'm going to not do that. I think I do want to hear Kevin's piece, because it's also, so many of these pieces are really good. But let's talk about Kevin Johnson's piece. So another really good piece that is nice and condensed, brings everything into a short period of time. There you go. So, again, just really well done in terms of the handling of the imitation, the use of all the devices that we're looking for, following the right general form. By right general form, I just mean, looking similar to the model we've been using. Not that that's the only possible model, but yeah, here is his theme. There's his original theme, and then here it is restated in the bottom voice. And then we get lots of little variations of that thing. We get this version, which is an inversion of, actually the whole thing is inversion of it, right? That whole thing stated here in bar 3 is an inversion of the original idea. So it looked at first to me like it wasn't exactly, but as I'm looking at it, no, it's an exact inversion, at least up until the very end, because the very end, the eighth 2/16 was a leap up of a fourth, so it should have been a leap down of a fourth, but instead he's coming down a step because he wants to come back to the E flat. So those are the reasons you make those adjustments. And this piece, I think, is especially good to talk about those sorts of tonal adjustments, because he's making quite a few tonal adjustments when he goes to the minor key that I think are really effective, and I want to talk about why they might exist. So starting here is where he has his minor key version of the same theme. And he has it this time in the bottom voice first, then imitated in the top voice. And check it out, it's a little different than the original. The original was, right? This version here is, so what's different about it? Well, the original was down a fourth and then stepping up. This one, though, is just down a third instead of down a fourth. So the question is, why did he do that? Well, I haven't seen his answer yet, if he's given one or not, but I'll tell you why I might have made the same choice. What would have happened had he not made that adjustment? He would have gotten this. So that augmented second would have happened as like 16th notes, whereas what he has instead is a slower approach into that augmented second. He was going to have that augmented second either way, but this version here allowed that to not feel quite as awkward because it's not as fast, right? Awkward intervals are less awkward if you got more time. So to me, that feels quite effective. And so if you didn't have a specific reason, that might be what your ear was picking up on, the relationship of that augmented second to the other thing. Because here's the other thing that's going on. Let's imagine a harmony. That's what I might hear. Some parallel fifths in there, but I hear a 4 chord. 2, 1, 5, 1. That's the implied harmony there. But the thing is, the 5 not showing up until the end meant we didn't really get to hear a leading tone. This version, we get to hear the 5 chord and hence the leading tone in a more harmonically, because this leading tone is right on the beat, so I can really hear a 5 chord, and that helps it say minor. This version, that B was like an afterthought, but here it gets to be a sustained note. It gets to really say 5 chord a little more strongly, or dominant chord, or just leading tone if you don't want to think chords. It gets to serve its purpose more strongly. This version here doesn't have a strong leading tone. Its only leading tone is in that little gap there between beat 2 and 3, but major keys don't need the leading tone as badly. Does that make sense? Because the major, it's not adjusted, right? I mean, it's with or without the leading tone, we're going to understand that this is a major key. Whereas in a minor key, the leading tone is kind of a little more significant, and you want to hit it a little harder. So that, to me, was a reason to make this adjustment, so we could hear that leading tone a little more strongly. Anyhow, that was my adjustment, my comment about that adjustment. My other comment about this piece had to do with the circle of fifths at the end, and I want to try something. I'm wondering, so right here you have the circle of fifths thing. Is that an A flat? Yes, it's a, sorry. So that all sounds good. I want to try it with an E flat. I want to try to see what happens if we keep this a little more diatonic. I just want to hear it. So I think here's so I made the comment, Kevin, in the thing. I made the analogy of marching band. So what's going on here is a circle of fifths, right? He has G7 in this measure, in this two beats, and then E7, C7 for two beats, F7 for two beats, B flat 7 for two beats, E flat. So it's a whole chain of dominant seventh, circle of fifths, which totally can work. There's something about it that's like keeps you guessing about what key you're in until the very end, and just adjusting one or two of those chords to be diatonic, like taking that C major and making it C minor, or taking the F major and making it F minor. Either of those adjustments might make it feel like you're closer to home and that you're not running to get there. So I made the analogy to marching band, and I don't know how many people here have ever been in a marching band, but there's a thing called 8 to 5, where you take 8 steps to go 5 yards, and you practice that over and over again so you can do it like, without thinking. But if you mess up and take your first couple steps too short, you realize, oh my gosh, I've only got 3 steps left, and that 35-yard line's a long ways away, and you got to take big steps at the end. So sometimes these circle of fifth progressions at the end can have that feeling like, oh, I know where I need to get, and I'm feeling rushed to get there. So yes, this is basically 5 of 5s. So what you would say is, to put harmonic analysis on it, you would say that the B flat chord here, that's basically B flat chord at the end is 5, then this is 5 of 5, and then this is 5 of 5 of 5, and then this is 5 of 5 of 5 of 5. So 5/5/5/5/5, or I don't know if I miscounted my 5s, but that's how you normally write this stuff. You'll find in classical, early classical and earlier, that you don't see chains of actual major dominant sevenths, secondary dominants quite that long, quite that often, quite that prominently, especially not like to set up the end of a piece, because it does feel like it's rushing to get somewhere. You'll see that like in interior places a little more often. So and even then, not as often in like early classical and earlier, but you'll see it in later classical and later, this idea of moving around the circle of fifths, all secondary dominants, keeping us off balance, so that when we land in a new key, it's, like, I don't know, getting off, some sort of spinning wheel, and you come off and you're in a different place than you started. So it's a nice effect, but if it ever feels like it's a little much, there's two things. One is you adjust to make it more diatonic, and the other is you just adjust the pacing of it, so that you say, well, maybe I stay on that C chord longer. Give it 4 beats of the C chord, or 4 beats of the G chord, four beats each instead of 2 beats each, or 1 beat each. You experiment with changing the pacing of that chain of dominance if it's feeling off. As it is to me, I'm not saying it did feel off, but it did come as like, oh, we're trying to get home. I'm in C minor. I may be ready to stay in C minor a little longer. Suddenly I'm done, right? So if you felt like you wanted to stay in C minor longer, and then therefore you needed to stretch this out more, and then land in E flat and stay in E flat for a measure before you're done, though, that's what I mean by pacing. Anytime the circle of fifths thing feels like it's not working in any way, don't blame it on the circle of fifths. Just say, well, maybe it's a pacing thing, or maybe it's a little too much secondary dominant for the context, or what. So to me, this works, but to the extent that I would think hard about it, it would be those issues. Circle of fifths is great, and then you just tweak the details to make it work the way you want. Oh, and absolutely. Instead of making all of these literally, because he's got roots on G, C, F, B flat, E flat, right? He's being very explicit. These are dominant seventh chords. But you're absolutely right, Dave, that these could have been. The thing is, he's got the leading tones in the melody, so I'm not able to put them in the bass. But if I had gone instead, uh, if I just avoided that C, or if Kevin had just avoided that C by putting, say, a G below it or a B flat below it, and just avoided putting a C in that measure, then you wouldn't have a C7. You wouldn't have 5 of 5. You'd have 7 of 5 or 5. That would feel more Bach-like. That's another thing. That's a really good observation, Dave, because the fact that we have the roots of each of these chords, that takes it makes it feel that much more like we're covering a lot of ground. Whereas if that line had gone from G down to an E and then up to an F, it wouldn't, not having that root there would feel like a little less motion. Now the E is in the right hand, so I wouldn't have put it in the left hand also. But just thinking about this technique for other pieces, yes, using diminished chords, 7 chords instead of 5, allows it to feel like it's not having to work quite as hard to achieve the same goal. And Bach was all about that. So Bach, you won't see full dominant seventh chords as often in Bach as you might in other composers later. You'll see him using 7 chords instead of 5 chords that way, right? So great observation, great place to kind of conclude on. By all means, keep putting some more pieces up. But if you haven't already, finish out the rest of the course. Look at the lessons on stretto and the canon stuff. And I will post a project to write a canon, but spoiler alert, it's write a canon. The last lesson of the section that says canon construction is my demonstration, and it shows you exactly step by step how to go about writing a canon. And so by all means, watch those videos if you haven't already, and you can start thinking about writing yourself a canon. But I'll make a post about it too. So thanks everyone for the lively discussion, all the great music, and so much, yeah, just so much to learn about all this stuff, and just seeing all these pieces coming together is just so gratifying for me, and hopefully you all are enjoying it as much. So next week, again, we'll focus on canon. So you, by all means, start reading those or watching those videos if you haven't. Start playing around with it. You might want to do some practice canons or just little 4-measure segments of it to get the technique down. Yeah, that's where we're going to be. So today supposedly was going to be the release of MuseScore 4.3, but I'm pretty sure it's being delayed because of a couple issues that they want to fix. So thanks everyone again. See you next time. Bye.